Hey, everybody. Good morning. So, this morning is our question and answer live session. And as we wait to see if some others come on live, I just wanted to welcome you. And I did my morning virtual class, so I'm feeling very good. And I have my second cup of coffee to get through the questions. I do have questions that were sent in. And so I will kind of work through those. But also, as you come on, if you have questions, feel free to just put them in the chat and I'll just work my way through in sort of the order they come. But if something comes in the chat, we can always answer that and then come back to the list. So if you are less familiar with me, my yoga is Yoga with TG, and I'm a 500 experienced registered yoga teacher through Yoga Alliance, which basically means I've taken over 500 hours of accredited yoga training, and I've taught over now 2,500 hours of yoga, which is kind of crazy. That's a lot of yoga, but it doesn't seem like it's been that many, but I guess it has. So that's a little bit about me. And I did have one question come in about basically like why I decided to teach yoga. So I guess that's kind of a nice, good place to start as any. Um, so when I actually signed up for my first yoga teacher training, I signed up not really sure I would ever actually want to teach yoga. I have, another job and I have kids and family. And so I didn't really sign up with the idea that I would teach yoga or that I would own a studio or now kind of two studios. I have my online and I have a brick and mortar studio now. And I really just loved yoga and found something in the practice that I had never found before. And I wanted to learn more while I had the opportunity to do so. I just wanted to dig deeper. But as, of course, often happens, the more I kind of learned and the more I got into it and the more I loved the practice, I really felt like if I didn't teach, then I might keep someone else from finding the same practice. That if I could provide for others what was provided to me, what I found in yoga, then I should do that. And so that's why I started teaching. It's also why I'm not the yogi that focuses on like headstands and handstands and doing the splits, but I'm really focused on introducing people to the practice and helping them find ways for the practice to be nourishing for them. Of course, I think yoga is for everybody. It might not be something that you love, but if it is, if it could be, if you haven't tried it and you have kind of reasons why you think it's not a good match, would love the chance to introduce it to you, answer your questions, that type of thing. And so that's really why I started teaching and why I kind of have the focus that I have on bringing people to the practice who are curious, right? I was curious. I said I flirted with yoga, is how I saw it. And it's been a real game changer for me. So that's why I decided to teach, and I love it. It's amazing. Okay, so next question that came in was, is it a bad thing that I can't remember pose names or alignment from class to class or session to session? So this person was talking about that they feel like they've taken classes and they feel a pressure to remember what Warrior 2 is versus Warrior 1, that type of thing. Don't worry about it. As I actually wrote back already to this person and told them that's my job, right? That's why you have your instructor, your teacher from class to class or from session to session. If you're new, a lot of times people want to maybe start with a beginner's course or they want to start with private sessions so that they can have more cues for the alignment, more reminders as we go. But you don't have to worry about remembering what the flow was, what the poses were as we went through the class. That's why you have the instructor who will lead you through it. One of the things I really found early on in yoga when I started taking yoga was I loved that it was a practice where I could and was encouraged to turn my mind off. That our mind keeps us on track all day, right? Go here, do this, don't forget this, work on this. But when I came to my yoga practice and I was on my mat, it was like all I had to do was listen to the cues and my body did the practice and I didn't have to think. And so that's one of the tenets of yoga. It's what we want to have happen is that you're not necessarily trying to remember what we did in class, what the different poses are. Like that's, you don't have to, there's no expectation that you are remembering. If you come and you're like, okay, oh, I forgot what's warrior one versus warrior two. We're not like, oh, but you've taken X number of classes. It's totally fine. If you want to become a teacher, then that expectation might change, right? But when you are coming and taking classes, there's no expectation that you have to remember everything that we have said or remember exactly what the alignment cues are. My beagle's in visiting us. If you hear the click, click, click of her feet and she comes to see what I'm up to. Okay, so that was a question that was sent in. Hopefully that was helpful and hopefully it relieves a little bit of pressure if you were feeling that way, right? I did have a couple of questions come in about kind of this starting yoga and how best to do that. And so I'm going to kind of clump my thoughts. They'll answer a couple of people's questions, I think. So if you're thinking about just starting a yoga practice, there's several ways that you can start a practice. The key, though, of all of them that I want to lead with is that you think about and do a little bit of homework on who you would like to start that practice with. I'm not sure that most people know that there's really no overarching requirements of who can teach yoga. So if you think about yoga classes that are at the gym or offered here or there, anybody can technically be hired to teach yoga. Even somebody that's just taken yoga for a while can be hired to teach yoga. I think a lot of times there's an assumption by students when they come to a studio or they come to a gym that their teacher has, certain credentials or there's been certain expectations that they have to have acquired this, that, or the other. And there's really not. Now, I say that, and of course I led with what mine were, because I do believe that accredited training is important as a registered yoga teacher. To stay registered, I have to take continuing education. There's expectations of me that I think help provide you with a little bit of ability to trust, right? That I am learning, I am taking good accredited classes. That is not to suggest that everyone who is a registered yoga teacher is good and knows what they're doing, or that those who aren't registered yoga teachers or haven't taken accredited training are all bad at what they do. But there is a range. And so I would always first kind of investigate who you trust, who you think could help you the most. And they should be able to help you with adjustments or modifications or variations. So especially if you have, certain obstacles or concerns or previous injuries, you might want to have a discussion with a teacher before you show up for a class or whatever. And that might also direct you in which way you want to start. So there are multiple ways that you can start. You can always just go to a class. Public walk-in classes, you can drop in, you can come and you can start. That, of course, comes with a little bit of a caveat. I think you should always arrive a little early so that you can at least have a discussion with the teacher, especially if you have concerns or, you don't want to be on your knees, or you need, to say, hey, when you cue this, is there another option? Anything like that, so that you can have that little bit of exchange. Your instructor should always be able to provide help for you in those situations, but also should potentially adjust the flow of the class to accommodate kind of who is there. If I have someone new in class, I always change what I'm doing, and I'll also always add additional alignment cues so that somebody new can hopefully feel as comfortable as possible. But that is one of the limitations to having public class be how you start, is because it's a flow and it's a class, there may be less time and ability for alignment cues. So if you're really trying to start, sometimes that makes people less comfortable because they feel like other people know more than they do. I think back to kind of that first question of, but I don't remember from class to class which this one is. So the other two ways are probably maybe better if that makes you nervous to just drop in to a public class, even though it's totally fine to do that. You can start with private sessions. So you can reach out to the instructor that you think you want to work with and set up private sessions, maybe once a week or twice a month, etc. Those can also be in conjunction with coming to a public class. So maybe every other week, right? You do a private session, then you come to a public class. If you're trying to start with once a week, you can always, decide. It doesn't have to be all just private or all just public classes. You can do a little bit of a mixture. The last option that I really probably love the best is taking a beginner's specific course or workshop or series, because then it's very specifically catered to you. It's usually a little bit also more economical than maybe private sessions once a week. Of course, private sessions once a week or even twice a month are tailored very specifically to you. That's why they're probably the highest ticket price, right? Because it's exactly what you want. You can stop, you can ask questions, you can, have those adjustments made on the spot. But a beginner's workshop is designed to introduce you to the practice, to build, and to take you from kind of start to feeling comfortable and familiar. And I have actually an online beginner's course that is comprehensive and that you can kind of come back to, right? There's videos of pose alignments and options. So depending, on what you're wanting to come back to, not just when you go through it the first time, but you can come back and remind yourself, maybe something happens and you're like, this isn't comfortable anymore. Let me go back to that video and check that out. There's also warm-up videos and short flows in the course so that you can build that familiarity with the cues, with the pacing, that type of thing. And that can really be a great way to build your confidence in your practice prior to maybe you beginning to come into those public classes. That beginner's workshop can really be a wonderful foundation for you for doing that you can then come back and drop into those classes and start coming regularly, because you know you have that course that you can come back to and remind yourself of. So those are my ideas on how to start. I do have a entire sheet, PDF, multiple page. I'm going to put it in the chat here. Download about all of my tips for starting a safe yoga practice, and whether you're starting in person in a studio or online. So I put that in the chat, that download for all of my tips for how to start a safe practice and maintain a safe practice, no matter how you're starting, whether it's online or in the studio. Okay, checking the chat here to see if any other questions have come in. Before I just keep going here, again, if you are coming on now, we're doing questions and answers. I have a list that came in, but you can throw your questions into the chat. Okay, how do you feel about YouTube and yoga on YouTube? So I used YouTube when I was first starting. Many of you, if you know me, know that I started practicing after a really serious car accident. And so my dominant arm, I couldn't even do like tabletop without my arm shaking a lot. So I couldn't do down dog, which you might think, well, how can you even do yoga, right? And it was a little tricky, right? And so I was nervous to try to go into a studio. I also was flirting with yoga. I wasn't sure it was going to be what I wanted. And so I used YouTube. And so it's great in a lot of ways, right? Probably all the ways that you would naturally think about. There's a gazillion options and flows out there for you that are free and that you can use. I think probably this question was geared toward if I have any concerns or cautions about YouTube. So, yes, of course, I do. Number one is back to what we talked a little bit about already, is anybody can post a video on YouTube. So make sure that if you're going to start practicing with someone, that you kind of vet them a little bit and make sure you feel like they are good. And also, one of the cons of yoga is yoga on YouTube is that it can be difficult to find something you want. There's like so many, it's almost like too many. And there's no necessarily sequential order to building that way on YouTube. And of course, there's a few big names out there who have like kind of playlists. But when I was using YouTube, there was always kind of that I'd start a practice and then be like, oh, I don't really like this one. Or what they were calling a beginner practice did not feel like a beginner practice to me. It was not what I was looking for. Or you'll see, some variety in styles of yoga, of pacing of the classes, of how they cue things. Every yoga teacher, is different in how their energy, how they cue, how they approach their classes. And so sometimes I would get started with a YouTube video and then I would be like, I don't really like this, or it's distracting to me, or, are they always going to say that instead of what, I really liked hearing? And so sometimes that can be really difficult when you're just using YouTube for your practice. It can be hard to build that consistency when you feel like every time you come to the mat, you're spending a little bit of time trying to figure out which video you want to do, or you're starting a video, stopping a video, picking another one. If it takes you, 10, 15 minutes to find something, sometimes that eats into like, now I feel rushed, or that wasn't what I wanted to have happen when I came to practice. So there are definitely some concerns there. Additionally, if somebody's starting out and they just start out with YouTube, like I did this, now looking back, I'm like, oh, I maybe should have realized this. A lot of times people will start out with YouTube yoga and they don't know enough yet to know, should I do that pose? Do I need to do that pose? They cued that, so I should try that. And they end up, potentially hurting themselves, or they don't know the proper alignment in that pose, and they're taking a class that on YouTube that doesn't give them any more alignment, and so they're trying to kind of figure it out, but they may not be doing things quite correctly. So I do recommend that you take a beginner's workshop at a studio, or like I was talking about, my online course that I have, so that you have a good foundation of a yoga practice before you just queue up any kind of random yoga that you find on YouTube. Making sure that you're practicing in that safe way. And again, if you're just joining in the chat, I did put a link to my tips for starting a safe practice, because I always hate when someone has started on YouTube, or they've gone to a class at some gym that wasn't catered to beginners, and they cued maybe some more intermediate poses. They didn't adjust the class for who was there. And then they end up hurt, and they think that yoga isn't good for them, or that that's what all yoga classes would be like. And then I think, oh, but I wish if you had started with me, that wouldn't have happened. So there are some cons to YouTube. Additionally, I think with anything, and this is, I think, the last thing I'll probably say about cons of YouTube, is the idea that at some point, if you really want to do something, if yoga, like with me, once I realized that yoga was really good for me, I felt great. It was good for my body. It was good for my mind. It was what I wanted to pursue. YouTube was not going to be enough. That I needed and wanted to really commit to finding a teacher, finding a class, finding someone that I could really work with, because there are so many variations, that there is something in finding someone who really connects with you and you like their cueing. You can build that familiarity taking their classes. And also, that commitment to what's important to you. There is something about making that step of investment that, yeah, taking a class or taking private sessions or joining a membership isn't free, but that commitment to yourself and to that practice is really important. Plus, there are, of course, benefits to having a membership of a teacher that you connect with. No matter what you queue up, you're going to like it. You understand, what to expect, and you don't have to spend all that time scrolling or looking. You have that connection in your classes, in your community, whether it's in person or online. Those private sessions, you have that like trust level. And so there are lots of reasons why YouTube can be great, but also kind of where its limits are, especially if you're just starting. Or on the other side, if it really is something you want to commit to, I think you're going to find bigger steps, more growth, if you really commit and invest in that practice in some way. Okay, so that is that. Of course, often a question I get is what recommendations I have for mats, a yoga mat. There are, of course, really fancy, expensive mats. The one I use at the studio is one of those, but I'm on it, as you heard, a lot. And so if you're really just starting out, I don't think you have to go straight into a really expensive mat. And it is kind of an in-depth thing. I have a blog post and a video about this. So I'm going to put in the chat here. If you really want my full thoughts about what yoga mat is good to use, I put it in the chat, bit.ly/the mat for me. There are lots of middle of the road. I wouldn't go the cheapest mat you can find, but I also, if I was just starting out, wouldn't start with the most expensive mat either. And so those Gaiam mats that you can usually get, $30 or under. Marshalls, a lot of times, if you have a store like that nearby, often will have those mats, but at even reduced prices. So you can get kind of a decent middle of the road mat for that really entry point price. So I always think that's a great place to start. And then you can build from there. Of course, the expensive mats are expensive for a reason. They do last a lot longer. And so if you get started with that middle of the road mat and you find that this practice is, like I found, something that you're going to want to do a lot of and for many years, then maybe that step up into that next more expensive mat is what you'll want to do. Or that gift list. Maybe your fancy mat makes it onto your birthday or holiday wish list. Okay. Somebody talked about that. I, of course, talk about practicing at home, but what if they really prefer in-person courses or classes? So one of the misconceptions I think is out there is that you kind of have to pick that. Well, I really prefer in person, so I'm not sure an online membership or taking online or virtual classes is a good fit for me. And what I recommend and what I find is that most people don't pick either or, and that a lot of people often will start one way and then add the other. So there are a lot of people that often start in the studio. They drop into a class or they come with a friend and they realize, ooh, that I really like this. But sometimes maybe it's schedule of the studio or schedule of other things. We have so many things going on in our life, right? That they can't always make that class, or they can't add another class. Because one of the things you'll find if you start yoga is you might start with that one class, but then you start wanting more. And so often my in-person students will eventually want to add another class, and maybe my studio schedule doesn't match with them. And so that's when they start looking to add a practice at home. And of course, that frees up, you don't have to travel to the studio. You don't have to find daycare. You don't have to, all of that kind of stuff. The practice is different at home, but that doesn't mean it's less. And if you really start that at home practice, it can really grow and be very complementary to the in-person classes. I have the other happen too. Someone will start maybe on YouTube. And so they kind of get some practice at how to and how they like to practice at home, where they do it and how they do it. And then they might come in and take an in-person class too. And so they're meant to really work together to give you the ability to yoga when you want to. I do have an online membership. I have live virtual classes as well. And most of my members, if they live around where I do also pop in and take in-person classes. Or if they don't live where I do, many of them come to my Saturday morning virtual live class. So it's not necessarily an either or, but it is a way to deepen that practice where, great, come to the studio when it works and when it matches with your schedule, but knowing that you have kid activities and work activities and you need to make dinner and you need to do this, that you can practice on your schedule, that you have like that. Basically, you take the yoga studio with you in your bag or your purse or in your pocket, even on your phone. And so I will put in the link here to my membership if that is something you're thinking is that next step of, I have that weekly class I like to go to in the studio, or I have been taking, the live virtual class, but maybe it is time to add another class to my week. Also, if your schedule, like I said, you want to do morning yoga, unless we set a private session, I don't really lead public yoga in the mornings. And so the online membership gives you that chance. I will yoga with you at 4 in the morning because it's on the app, on the on-demand app. And I may very well still be asleep in person. Right. And so it gives you that flexibility to not only deepen your practice and add another time that you're going to yoga, but on your schedule, what's going to really work for you. And it doesn't always have to match with the studio. And I'm going to answer two more questions here because we are already at half an hour. That's amazing. I could talk yoga all the time. And that probably will mean I'll have to do another one of these. I'm not sure I'm going to get all of these questions answered today. But how often and when? I get that asked a lot, and that both of those questions did come in as well, which I feel like is kind of where I was headed here with talking about at home and in person and how you can use those complementary. I always recommend, if you're starting, that you set that goal of once a week. I think a once a week class is amazing and is great. And that gives you enough chance to try to build that in consistently. A lot of times, I think if we think, New Year's resolutions, or we kind of get excited about something and we go gung ho in and we're like, I'm going to yoga every day. If you're just starting, I don't know that you'll be able to do that consistently long term. And then you might kind of burn out, or you get discouraged that your schedule isn't working the way that you wanted it to, et cetera, et cetera. But if you commit to trying once a week, I'm going to try to make it into the studio or catch a virtual class, or I'm going to get this online membership and I'm going to log into the app once a week and I'm going to build from there. I think that is a great way to do it, because once you get that once a week built consistently, then it's easier to add a second. And then you do see some major growth and development as you can add. Doing once a week is great, but eventually doing twice a week. I have somebody who said that third time, that when they added the third a week, they saw huge improvements and gains in how they felt and in how their practice was deepening. And so starting once a week, I think, is a goal if you're just starting out. If you have been doing yoga pretty consistently once a week, then I recommend maybe trying to find a time that you can build it in that second time. When else could you do it? And this is where you might find that difficulty in the studio schedule versus your schedule. You might say, well, I would really like to add that second class, but I really would need to do it blank, right? This time on this day. And that's where access to something like a membership can be really helpful, because then you can do it then, but you can still do it. Like if you take my classes and you like me, which hopefully you do, the online membership gives you that chance, right? To say, oh, well, I'll just pull her up on the app, and you could do sculpt really early in the morning. You can do vinyasa really late at night, or restorative, like whenever. So adding that second one can be easier once you have kind of that first one. And that's how really you'll see that snowball effect. So how often and when is really up to you in a lot of ways. I recommend building, like I just said. But as for when you should yoga, I think whenever you can is the answer. There are, of course, people who will make the case for first thing in the morning before you eat breakfast and before the sun comes up, that type of thing. I think that we all are a little bit different. Our cycles are a little bit different. Our routines are a little bit different. And so I personally have found anytime I try to force myself into changing that rhythm, that's when I'm less successful. And that's when I find a harder time at maintaining it versus if I work with my rhythms and my schedule, then I have more success. So thinking about your day, what your current schedule is, that might dictate when you yoga. That happens for me quite a bit. But also thinking about when do you want to? When do you feel that urge to be like, oh, I really wish I could yoga right now, and working from there, because I find that you'll have more success at. So whenever it works in your schedule, and being able to do that, the online on-demand membership app kind of gives you that flexibility too, that, oh, I have this little pocket of time. I really want to go yoga. You can open it up and do it right then. There's no like, oh, I've got to get into YouTube and now I've got to do that scrolling and looking and searching and, oh, I don't like this one, and oh, this wasn't what I wanted. You can find the length of class, the type of class, and go, right? So that might sound like a non-answer. You should yoga when you want to. But it's the truth. I think that's when you'll have the most success. So quick reminder as I wrap up here, if I didn't get your question answered, I'll plan another one of these soon, hopefully, and I can answer it then, or I'll reply to your message and answer it for you, at least specifically, so that you can get your answer. And in the chat, depending on when you came on today, there are 3 things in the chat that hopefully could help you out. One is my tips for practicing and starting safe. Also, my best advice for my mats, the ones I recommend and why and for whom, each mat. And then also, of course, my online on-demand membership, if you think that sounds like a good next step to complement your in-person classes, or to add that second or third practice in a time frame that works for you. You can queue up whatever type of yoga you want for however length of time you want, anytime that you want. So I hope you'll check out those links and let me know what other questions that you have. I'll keep this list, and I'll answer more as they come in, and maybe we'll do this again if you liked it. So thank you very much for watching and joining, and I will see you next time.